the Biz and Tax Matters with Mike and Dennis. I'm your host, Michael Davis, and I'm a certified public accountant. My co-host is Dennis Markowitz.
Hi, I am an enrolled agent.
We operate from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Today, our special guest is Mark Crocco of Integrity Leadership Development, Inc.
I'm delighted to be here, Mike. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for coming. Our mission is to inform our listeners every other week as to the various aspects of running a business, the tax code, and answer any questions they may have. So please call your questions into our call-in number, 609-460-4673. If you're interested in any of our past shows, they're now on our website at bizandtaxmatters.com. So that you know, if you're listening to our live show, today is Tuesday, August 7th, 2018. We also have an email address, which is bizandtaxmatters@mjdaviscpa.com. So if you're listening to the show from podcast at panjradio.com, send us an email and please note Biz and Tax Matters in the subject. The podcasts are available, panjradio.com, as I said, and will be replayed at 11 o'clock every day for the next week. So if you can't listen to our live show, send an email with your questions, and we will answer it on the next show. Again, the email is bizandtaxmatters@mjdaviscpa.com. Our live call-in number, again, 609-460-4673. And all our past shows are also on our website at www.bizandtaxmatters.com. And Dennis, I guess we'll start with our tax updates like we usually do. In the past month, because we haven't had a show in a month, the IRS has issued final regulations on substantiation and reporting requirements for cash and non-cash contributions, which largely follow some of the proposed regulations. I mean, they're finalizing this now. The proposed regulations were issued in 2008. So it's taken them 10 years to get through
That's
this.
a decade.
Yes. The final regulations contain the record-keeping requirements and definition of qualified appraisal and qualified appraisal from the proposed regulations, and include the following changes. A lot of times you go and you can get blank pledge cards obtained from the donee, and you fill it out yourself. Those are no longer acceptable. They have to be filled out by the donee. And that's a big change.
No, I don't think so. They were never really accepted. If they were in small amounts, they were just ignored because they weren't.
Well, under 250, they were generally accepted.
Yes.
But this is under 250, they won't be accepted anymore.
Exactly.
The final regulations also do not include the requirement that in order to show reasonable cause for not obtaining an appraisal, if you require an appraisal for any contributions over $5,000 of non-cash items, so they left out the reasonable cause. So you now have to have an appraisal, and a reasonable cause is not going to be accepted.
Is it accepted if your attorney writes a note to you of what the value is?
No, not anymore, because there is now a specific requirement for an appraiser who has to have an education and a certification in his field. It used to be, the rule was somebody that normally would provide an appraisal within that field. Now they have to be licensed. So there's all new rules with that. So anybody that's involved with making those kind of donations should update themselves on what the new rules are. This regulation is TD 9836, if anybody wants to look it up.
Thank you, Mike. A bribe taker willfully failed to file the FBARs, which is the foreign bank accounts that people have. The taxpayer was a former combat engineer for the U.S. Army. After leaving active duty, he worked for the Army Corps of Engineers as a project engineer in Iraq. At some point, he accepted bribes and kickbacks from 2 Iraqi citizens in exchange for confidential bid information for an oil pipeline project. The funds were deposited in bank accounts in Egypt and Jordan. For 2007 and 2009, the taxpayer failed to file a report of foreign bank financial accounts, which is referred to as the FBAR. He filed an FBAR in 2008, but it reported only one Jordanian account. The IRS sought to impose penalties for willfully failing to file complete FBARs. The taxpayer argued that the IRS was collaterally stopped from doing so because of criminal actions against him. A New Jersey district court sided with the IRS, finding that the taxpayer willfully failed to file the FBARs to hide his illegal kickback scheme. And it only goes to show that you have to report everything,
Correct.
on your tax return, unless you're the president. I didn't say that. But you have to be very careful because these penalties are draconian, and the no excuse is allowable. Like, oh, I didn't know the law.
Yeah, ignorance is no excuse.
It's not blissful either.
Correct. Joint returns were valid despite the wife's forged signature, the court said. For the years at issue, the taxpayer's husband filed the returns, paid all the taxes due. However, he signed the returns on behalf of his spouse without her knowledge or consent. After he died, she refiled the returns and sought refunds of taxes that was paid for her based on a separate return. She claimed the joint returns were invalid due to the forged signatures. A North Carolina district court said, no, that's not the case. When one spouse signs a joint return, the return is valid if the non-signing spouse intended to file jointly. And in this case, they found that the spouse left all the tax matters up to her husband, understood that he prepared and filed joint returns on her behalf. Therefore, she was precluded from replacing the valid joint returns with separate returns that showed a smaller tax liability. And that was a district court in North Carolina. So if you have knowledge, that makes you part of the return, is basically what they're saying.
If you have knowledge in what? The return was filed or is fraudulent?
Well, they're saying that, no, there's no fraud here.
Okay.
Okay, the return was just filed, and he signed the wife's name. That could be the fraud, if anything. They're saying that she knew that he was signing her name, and she knew that it was a joint return, and she left all the tax matters up to him and allowed him to do that over the years. So therefore, it was a valid return, and she couldn't file a separate return.
Interesting.
Yeah, I found that interesting too.
4 states sue the federal government over state and local tax deduction cap. For tax years 2018 through 2025, a taxpayer's itemized deduction for state and local taxes, which they refer to as SALT, S-A-L-T, is limited to $10,000, $5,000 if married, filing separately per year. Recently, New York, Connecticut, Maryland, and New Jersey filed a complaint with the U.S. District Court for Southern District of New York seeking declaratory and injunctive relief to invalidate the SALT deduction cap. The complaint argues that the cap violates the U.S. Constitution by interfering with the state's sovereign authority to decide whether and how much to invest in their residents, business, and infrastructure. In addition, the complaint claims that the new SALT deduction cap deliberately seeks to compel certain states to reduce their public spending. This lawsuit follows the organization of a multi-state coalition by New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Maryland has subsequently joined to fight the new SALT deduction cap. Now, I find this interesting because those states follow the federal government tax return. And they can and do have adjustments to itemized deductions, such as you can't deduct the state's local income tax. Why can't they just say, okay, you can now claim certain deductions outside of the state or whatever they want? Why they have to sue this is beyond
Well,
me, but in Pennsylvania,
The dollar value of the deduction on the federal return and the state return is way different.
oh yes,
Because most states, I mean, I think one of the top rates is like 9% on one of the states.
right.
And, you're 25 or more in federal, generally, if you're itemizing. So there's a big difference in the amount of money that people are saving, whether it's a federal or state deduction.
Well, that's true, but it just seems that all the states have to do is change their forms or laws, and they can circumvent this without going through a lawsuit, which I don't know whether they would win or not. Probably.
Well,
on
we're
some,
going to find out.
yeah, probably on some technical thing, but
We'll find out. It'll be interesting.
no, yes,
It's going to be an interesting case. Because there's also the issue where some of the states are looking to make state and local taxes a charitable donation, which a couple states have and have had it forever. I think it's Mississippi is one of them. And that has gone through the Supreme Court and passed. So if they model it after that, it should be fine.
yeah, it should be. But keep in mind that these donations or charitable contributions to the state only account up to 90% of your tax. You still have to pay the other 10%. Of course, they may
But then it
modify
could-
this.
Right.
So, in effect, the state's getting more money.
Right. In this case, a payment of employees' taxes that were not withheld but paid by the employer is not employee income in a prior year. In an examination of a 2016 employment tax return resulted in an employer paying $4,000 plus of withholding and payroll tax to the IRS in 2018 on an employee's $10,000 of unreported fringe benefits. $2,500 was federal income tax, $765 was FICA, and $765 for the employer match. According to a recent program manager technical advice, the $2,500 employer tax for income tax withholding cannot be recovered by the employee in a former calendar year under the regulation, either by subsequent withholding or gross up of wages. The employee gets no credit for the payment for the amount paid by the employer under Internal Revenue Code Section 31. He does get credit, the employee does get credit for the $765 Social Security tax once paid by the employer or the employee, and that can be recovered from the employee by the employer. And that's PMTA, which is Program Manager Technical Advice 2018-15. I found that interesting that they didn't allow the guy to amend his tax return and take that withholding.
Yes, I have to agree with you.
Yeah,
But I always tell my
that could end up
clients,
in court.
I always tell my clients, taxes are to raise revenue, not to be fair.
That's true, and not to make sense.
You saying taxes have something to do with logic?
No, they don't.
Thank you.
Nothing.
Okay, prepare a due diligence proposed regulations amended for head of household rule. The IRS has released proposed regulations that amend previously proposed regulations for the preparer due diligence penalty. And they reflect the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expansion of the penalty due to eligibility to file as head of household. Prior to the TCJA, the past tax law, the preparer due diligence penalty applied to eligibility for an amount of the earned income tax credit, the child tax credit, and additional child tax credit, and for the American Opportunity Tax Credit. For 2018 returns, preparers may be subject to a $520 penalty for any tax return or refund claim for which they fail to satisfy the due diligence requirements. The expanded penalty for the head of household filing status applies for tax years beginning after 2017. They are prepared on or after the date of the final regulations are published. Now, I find this unusual because now the preparer is going to have a penalty if he doesn't do his due diligence in determining whether someone is married or single or filing independently or anything else. To what extent does a tax preparer have to go to verify this? If the client tells him one thing, does he have to challenge the client?
We're going to see what the questions are on the due diligence questionnaire, because that does have to go in with the tax return now.
Yeah, it was
It's gonna
interesting.
be a fourth item on there.
Yeah, 2 years ago it was 1 page. Last year it's 2 pages. Now it's going to be 3 pages, and it's going to be unlimited of what they are going to blame the tax preparer for in trying to do a tax return.
Correct. Well, they're going to basically blaming the taxpayer that he should be informing, or blaming the tax preparer that he should be informing the taxpayer what the rules are if they want to be head of household and make sure they fall within the rules.
Okay, now how many clients do you have that you send a questionnaire in which they don't answer? They just send you the documentation.
Right, but if it's something like they say, I want to file head of household, I go through what the rules are with them and to make sure that they qualify,
Okay.
especially if they're married. It's generally fairly easy if they're not married and the child is in their custody more than 50% of the time. They can be head of household. That's generally the rule. Gets tricky when there's another spouse involved, whether it be through a divorce or whether it be through they're married filing separate for whatever reason. Then it gets tricky. The rules get tricky. But we do check that. So, in another matter, IRS is encouraging certain veterans, to file amended tax return. Thanks to the Combat Injured Veterans Tax Fairness Act of 2016, veterans who pay taxes on disability severance payments received after January 17th, 1991, may file amended returns to claim a refund.
That's 25 years ago.
Yes, it is. Veterans can submit an amended Form 1040X that reflects the actual amount of their severance payment, or use a simplified method. Veteran using this method should write disability severance payment on line 15 of Form 1040X and enter on lines 15 and 22 the standard refund amount, which is $1,750 for 1991 to 2005, $2,400 for 2006 to 2010, and $3,200 for 2011 and 2016. All veteran claiming refunds should write either Veteran Disability Service or St. Clair claim across the top of 1040X. They must be made within the normal 3-year statute of limitations period or 1 year from the date of a letter sent by the Department of Defense, whichever expires later. And that's News Release IR 2018-148. The thing that confuses me about this news release is that it refers to the 3-year statute of limitation on things that are 27 years back.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if it's 3 years from the date the act was passed in 2016 or when the 3 years start. That's something that if you are a veteran and you are on disability and you feel you're eligible for this, you should talk to your accountant and make sure you file it immediately, and what the actual rules are, the specific rules governing it are.
I concur. The home office deduction denied for document storage in garage. The taxpayer owned a smog inspection station in California. By law, he was required to keep certain invoices and records regarding smog checks for at least 3 years. Because the station lacked office space, the taxpayer stored the inspection invoices and other business-related items in a shared 2-car garage attached to his personal residence. On his federal income tax returns for the years at issue, the taxpayer claimed home office expense deductions for the use of his garage. He argued that this was the most convenient and inexpensive place to store the records. the IRS disallowed the deduction under the Code Section 280A. The tax court sided with the IRS, finding that the taxpayer's garage wasn't used exclusively as his principal place of business. Also, he didn't qualify for an exception that pertains to storage of inventory or product samples that are sold at retail or wholesale. This is interesting because a lot of people have storage problems. As opposed to getting a storage place, they put it in their garage. Well, you're allowed to do that, but you're not allowed to take any deduction on it. So it's interesting. Of course, now it's going to be done away with because you could scan everything in on the computer, and then you don't have to worry about the storage. But that'll take years because you're not going to go back 3 years and scan everything.
Right. And the question is, I mean, this looks like they took deduction for the whole garage, too.
Well, it really didn't say what it is,
So,
but, how do you distinguish, how much of a deduction? I tell my clients, if you're talking about a couple $100, just forget it. It's not going to amount to a hill of beans in taxes, but they have this concept, I deducted or everything else. It's like the story I always tell people. They take $10,000 and take it as a donation. And what happens is you can deduct it on your return, and you can get $2,000 back on your taxes, hypothetically. Well, you're out $8,000. Now, what happens if you don't do the donation? Because the only thing was not for the for the charity you gave it to, but just take a deduction, and you pay $2,000 tax on it. You're left with $8,000. Well, which do you want in your pocket, $2,000 or $8,000? So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, our last update today. The IRS is questioning the deductibility of prepaid property taxes in New Jersey. And under the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, the taxpayer itemized deductions for state and local taxes for 2018, 2025 is limited to $10,000. $5,000 married filing separate per year. In response to the limitation, Governor Christie issued an executive order requiring municipalities to accept payments for 2018 property taxes in 2017. The New Jersey Attorney General has asked the IRS to confirm that such payments are deductible in 2017. In response, the IRS has reiterated its position that prepaid 2017 property taxes may be deductible in 2017 returns if the taxes were assessed prior to 2018 and the taxpayer paid it in 2017. Specifically, IRS noted if the tax wasn't imposed by state or local tax jurisdiction by the end of 2017, it could not be deductible in 2017. This response implies that the IRS disagrees with New Jersey's position. And that's Information Letter 2018-09. And I know, I believe, in my opinion, is in New Jersey, taxes are assessed based on a fiscal year on a quarterly basis, fiscal year being July through June. And payments are due August, November, January, April, and you get a tax coupon for 4 years, for all 4 quarters. I believe the ones that are due in 2018 because they were assessed in 2017, that the IRS is going to allow those. But anybody that paid anything beyond that, I think they're going to fight. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I have
and
to
I
agree
think
with
that's
your
what
opinion.
they're saying here. Okay. And now we're going to get to this week's topic. Again, I'll introduce our guest again, Mark Crocco. Mark is a coach of leadership for various entities, and he's written a book on leadership called Own a Dealership, Get a Life, 7 dealership decisions that give car dealers their lives back. Mark, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I spend most of my life in car dealerships. doing leadership development work in dealerships, but we are not limited to car dealerships. We work in other areas as well. The premise of all the work that we do is simply this: the quality of life in any organization is impacted more by the quality of leadership than any other single factor. So what it feels like to be a part of an organization, and ultimately what the customer experience is like, is directly related to the quality of leadership that leaders are providing in organizations. So that's foundational to everything that we're doing.
And I know I've gone through the book, not the whole book, but I've gone through a lot of the book. And it is specific to car dealers, but as was going through and reading, I'm thinking any larger company should follow the things that are in this book. So this book could be used by other people, other companies to.
Yes. The principles transfer into
Correct.
any organization and are not limited just to that sphere. That just happens to be a realm that we spend a lot of time in. But because leadership is central to any organization, the principles will transfer.
And I know in the book, in the introduction, you discuss the leadership and how leadership issues could not just interfere with the business life, but interfere with the leader's personal life.
Yes.
How does that work?
Well, when we do the work that we're doing, we try not to make a false dichotomy of who human beings are in terms of cutting them in half. We believe that what is happening in people's lives professionally is spilling over and impacting their personal lives, and what is happening in their personal lives is spilling over and impacting their professional lives. When we do the work of leadership development, we are trying to help leaders understand that the single greatest leadership challenge any leader has is leading and managing themselves. So the better job that we do managing ourselves and our emotions, both in our professional and our personal lives, the more effective that we're going to be in our relationships. Because in the final analysis, life is all about relationships. And we are not going to be successful either professionally or personally unless we are being relationally successful. So we talk about those things all the time, and we try to help people to understand that we need to take a holistic approach to leadership development because there are those personal and professional components to anybody's life.
Mark, you mentioned holistical?
Holistic, yes.
Holistic? What do you mean by that?
Well, when we are looking at people, there are some people who approach the work of leadership development simply from the professional side of who people are. And I really believe that integrity is the foundation of leadership. So we need to be addressing character issues if we're going to help people to become more effective as leaders. So when we're taking a holistic approach, we're looking at people who people are in terms of the essence of who they are, and their character is ultimately going to determine the effectiveness of their leadership. So we're taking a broader approach from that perspective.
Okay. Now, some people are what they would call born leaders, and there are other people that are followers. Do you make a distinction when you handle something like that?
Well, what you're addressing is the issue of whether people are naturally leaders or whether people can learn to be leaders. I do believe that there are some people, because the essence of leadership is about influence, there are some people who naturally influence other human beings at higher levels than others. But I do believe that leadership is something that can be learned. And because leadership is primarily about influencing other human beings, I believe all of us, if we're willing to look at ourselves, if we're willing to become more self-aware, we can improve our communication skills and our relational skills and have a much more positive influence and impact upon others. So I do believe that people can learn to be better leaders.
Okay. Yes, I feel the same way, that people can learn to be leaders or learn to be whatever they want to be. To me, I see the problem of them wanting to do this, desiring to do this, and putting effort into it. And some people just think they should have it because of whatever.
Yeah. Well, leadership, like anything else in the world, is something that people need to be highly intentional about. If people are going to make changes in any realm of their lives, they have to bring the right attitudes to the table. There is certain knowledge that people need to gain and to understand, and then it becomes an issue of practicing and practicing and practicing the principles and the concepts and the knowledge that we're exposed to. Hopefully people that want to be leaders can develop those leadership skills, but it's always going to be a process. It's never an event. And it takes great intentionality if people are going to be purposeful about impacting others.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We're going to take a break right now. We'll come back to our topic after the break.
Great.
Explore the river towns of New Hope and Lambertville and be part of the fun. Shop in the area's most unique stores, from antiques to toys to apparel, and you're sure to find a one-of-a-kind treasure. Make a reservation at one of Lambertville or New Hope's variety of dining options. For dinner, wine, beer, or an artisan cocktail, indoors or out, grab an ice cream cone to enjoy by the river for the First Friday fireworks. Create memories that will last a lifetime at the river towns of New Hope and Lambertville, where everyone is welcome. Visit DelawareRiverTowns.com.
Hi, I'm Vinny Veterosa, and I approve this message.
Vinny is such a pussycat. And incidentally, if you've never had a massage by Vinny Veterosa, you must do it. You will be grateful to me for having suggested it, for him for having done it, and for yourself for having the wisdom to accept the advice.
Have table will travel with Vinny Verderosa.
He's got magic thumbs. The man has magic thumbs. He really does.
He really does.
Right now, 3 one-hour sessions for the price of 2, which include general massage, reflexology, and acupressure. Check me out. See for yourself why people feel so good when their session is done. On Facebook, Acupressure Have Table Will Travel. On the web, relaxintoreiki.com/partners. My telephone number is 732-259-3129. And you can get me here anytime on PANJradio.com.
Hey, I'm Deirdre Anderson with Delish Catering.
And I'm Laura Mangone from Chambers Walk Cafe and Catering.
And we'd like you to join us on Food for Thought, where what do we talk about, Laura? We talk about restaurants, we talk about
Pet
recipes,
peeves,
pet
food.
peeves, bitchy hostesses,
All sorts of food-related items.
all sorts of
Tune
food
in.
stuff, and sometimes not so much food stuff. We go off on segues, but we have a lot of fun, don't we?
Absolutely.
So join us on Food for Thought.
PANJradio.com, 1 o'clock weekdays.
Welcome back to Biz and Tax Matters with Mike and Dennis. I'm your host, Michael Davis. I'm a certified public accountant. My co-host is Dennis Markowitz.
Hi, I am an enrolled agent.
We operate from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Our mission is to inform our listeners every other week as to the various aspects of running a business, the tax code, and answer any questions they may have. Please call your questions into our call-in number, 609-460-4673. Today is Tuesday, August 7th, 2018. If you're listening to one of the replays over the next week at 11 a.m. or from a podcast at panjradio.com, send an email with your questions to bizandtaxmatters at mjdaviscpa.com. Please note Biz & Tax in the subject, and we will answer it our next show. All our past shows are also available at our website at www.bizandtaxmatters.com. Again, our call-in number is 609-460-4673. Back to our topic, how leadership development can increase profitability and productivity, with our special guest, Mark Crocco of Integrity Leadership Development, Inc. in Douglasville, PA. Mark, two things. One is you were talking about the integrity of the entity. Is that where you got the company name from?
Yes, I really believe that integrity is the foundation of leadership. If we want people to follow us, people need to believe in us. When people go to get loans, somebody has to determine whether people are credit worthy in order to have a loan issued to them. In the world of leadership, we need to be credit worthy. You know, there are a lot of people that are disillusioned about leadership in our culture. And so integrity, when we live with integrity, that will make us credible in other people's eyes, and it will build the trust that people need to have in us to follow us. There are times that I get into interactions with people and people will say, well, integrity, that sounds like an abstract or a theoretical concept. And I talk to people about the fact that there isn't anything that I can think of that is more practical than integrity. For example, a person has integrity when they make promises and keep those promises. A person has integrity when they say that they are going to do something and they actually follow up and follow through. A person has integrity when what they profess with their lips is actually what they live out in their lives. And in the work that I do, I am often challenging leaders. Integrity is when you are holding yourself accountable for the attitudes and the behaviors that you're seeking to hold your followers accountable to. So I don't believe that there is a leadership platform that is more powerful than someone having personal character and integrity. And it is my personal perspective that the greatest need in our country and the greatest need in the corporate world right now is for moral, ethical, and character-based leaders that we can trust and believe in.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I would agree with it, but, you know, they keep changing the definition of moral and ethical.
Yeah. Well, the challenge in the culture that we are living in is that we have been drowning for the last generation in what is called a sea of relativism. Relativism is a philosophical thought process that says there are no moral absolutes. I do not believe that taking a relativistic approach to life or to leadership is really a good foundation to approach life and leadership upon. So there are moral absolutes, there are principles. You know, even as I have listened to you guys this morning, as you're talking about the tax code, you know, many of the issues that you guys are talking about are moral and ethical issues. There is right and there is wrong. There is a right way to treat other human beings and there is a wrong way to treat other human beings. And so I don't believe that you can talk about leadership without a moral compass being a part of the discussion.
I agree.
I agree too.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to do as you say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like going to the doctor who's 300 pounds and telling me I have to lose weight.
Yes. Mm-hmm. If we're going to be credible in other people's eyes, we have to walk the talk. It's easy to talk the talk in many realms of life, but it's only when we are walking the talk that people are going to trust us and see us as credible.
I feel that people are too materialistic today.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would agree. I think one of the really important questions that we need to ask, whether we're talking about our lives professionally or whether we're talking about our lives personally, is how do we measure success? In the world of business, obviously,
It's quantified.
there has to be profit. But in the final analysis, even as we talk about integrity, if you want long-term business success, when you do what you do in the business world and you do it with integrity, you're always going to make more money ultimately than if you are doing the wrong thing in the short term. You may have short-term windfall, but sooner or later word gets out about whether you're a person of integrity or not, whether your company has integrity. But in the final analysis, when we try to evaluate what a successful life is all about, it ultimately comes back to love and family and friendship and relationships. There's a relational component to life. And I have interacted with many people who came to the end of their lives, and they ended up figuring out that they were leaning their ladder against the wrong wall. If we are not relationally successful on both a personal and professional level, from my perspective, we are not a success.
Everything he says, I agree with.
Yeah, I can't argue with it. And I know in the book you discuss a little bit about the aura around car dealers.
Yes.
And how they're generally considered to not be ethical.
Yeah.
How do you get around that when you're talking to the dealerships themselves?
Yeah, well, there are many negative stereotypes that exist in our world about car dealerships. I sometimes go through exercises when I'm training in the world of car dealerships, and I'll say, let's do word association. And I will say, used car salesman. And then people in the room will make all kinds of negative associations with the concept. Or I'll say, car dealerships, and people say that's the place you get ripped off, et cetera, et cetera. What I try to teach people is that those negative stereotypes can actually become their competitive advantage. Competitive advantage, when it's spoken about in the corporate world, is about what it is that separates you from your competition, what differentiates you from your competition. And I believe that as I share this message of integrity, in many of the car dealerships that I am in, that people embrace integrity as one of their competitive advantages, and we are trying to get people to use those negative stereotypes about car dealerships in a very positive way. And again, this emphasis is applicable to any other realm of life, any other business. So it doesn't matter whether we would be talking about financial services or whether we would be talking about the manufacturing sector or the automobile industry.
I agree.
All these principles are relevant all the way across the board, and they all transfer.
I agree. I actually, 3 weeks ago, just ran into an incident at a car dealership. So.
Okay.
And fortunately, at the end, the financial guy saw it and said that what we had was we have with the car my wife has, the manufacturer, you can put a deposit down on your lease and it reduces the payment. That deposit is refundable at the end of the lease. So when we went in to get her another lease, we told them we want that deposit to be a deposit
For
ongoing.
Yes.
And she just wanted the same deal. No problem. They give us the deal. We spent half an hour with them going over it and asked him a couple times. When we go with the finance guy, he says, you do know that that's being used as the down payment? And I said, no, it's not. We told him on more than one case. So the dealership themselves brought it to our attention.
Yes.
Okay, but
well, that's encouraging.
the salesman was playing with it.
Sure.
And the finance guy said, if you really want this, because the residuals are so low now, wait till the new cars come out and you'll probably be able to get that deal. So we walked out of the dealership. But yes, it does happen, but they corrected it.
Yeah.
So
we build a reputation, all of us, in any realm of life, one conversation at a time, one interaction at a time. And when we are dealing with other human beings, particularly in a corporate setting, in a business setting, we will always reveal over a period of time who we are. whether we have integrity or whether we don't, whether we are authentic and genuinely care about people, or whether we are inauthentic and do not care about people. Those things will always rise to the surface as we deal with others.
I agree with that. I agree with it all. How does effective leadership impact the bottom line?
Well, think about leadership in this way. Leadership is really about achieving results through people. It doesn't matter what business we could evaluate today, whatever business goals and objectives any organization ever sets their sights on, whatever strategic planning they do, whatever forecasting they do, the ultimate bottom line is that those things can only be achieved through human beings. Now, when leaders create a leadership-driven culture, and they understand that their primary task and responsibility is to grow and to develop their people, when people start growing and people are maturing professionally in their lives, and we are helping them to improve their people skills and their communication skills, even interdepartmentally and within their departments, what happens is people become more productive. And when people become more productive in organizations, the natural outflow of that is that organizations are going to become more profitable. I often say to people, please do not associate what I do for a living in the area of leadership development with just helping people to play nicer in the sandbox. We help people to do that, but ultimately business is about the bottom line. And when leaders are growing and developing their people, they will impact the bottom line productivity and the bottom line profitability of their organizations. I often ask leaders if any of their people have realized all of their unrealized potential. And every time I ask that question of a leader or a manager, they will often smile and they will say, Mark, no, nobody has ever really realized all of their potential. And I will say to them, listen, your job on any given day is to focus on mining more and more of that unrealized potential that people have. Leaders need to understand they are in the people development business, and there is no greater priority in their lives on any given day. Unfortunately, 90% of what I see managers doing on a daily basis has very little to do with the growth and the development of their people. So we're trying to help people to understand, as we deal with our clients, that leaders need a paradigm shift. They need to understand that the primary task and responsibility of a leader is the growth and the development of the leader's people. And nothing's going to impact the bottom line to a business more than that.
There are a lot of employees who don't think that way. They think that the subordinates are a challenge to their position, and they don't realize that someone with integrity wants to see this person develop someone to replace them, which means it leaves promotional opportunities for them.
Yes. I teach a concept that's called servant leadership. That concept does not originate with me, but I try to teach leaders. And this is very countercultural, and it's also counterintuitive. But leaders need to create relational environments with their people. I often say to leaders, if you win somebody's heart, they will give you their hands and their arms, their legs and their feet. But you've got to win their hearts first. People that we lead need to know that we genuinely care about them, that we want to see them grow, that we want to see them become successful. Servant leadership teaches us that I am first and foremost a servant and then secondarily a leader. So when people realize that the person who's leading me does want to see me grow and get to the next level, that's when people become loyal to you. If they don't think you genuinely care about them, and if you don't demonstrate that you are there to serve them and to make them more successful, you're never going to get them to be as fully engaged as they could be, and you're not going to get out of people what people really have the potential to deliver.
Down at my condo down in Margate,
Yes.
We have a manager who leads like that. during Sandy, she had a guy come in the next day. He came in without arguing and his house was wiped out. Okay. She came in on one of the Army trucks. That's how she got in, because she lives off the island. When the guys are working, she's out there working with them, and they'll do anything for her. And she's just the perfect example of it. It's just amazing to watch the people do anything that she wants. And if they need a hand, even if it's a hand taking the trash out, she'll be there helping them. That's what she does.
Well, and it sounds like she's someone who has done a good job building relational bridges, which is what leadership is all about.
Yeah.
But when we have a heart to serve, people will know that. And when we are placing the needs and the concerns and the well-being of other human beings before our own, that's where the magic happens on the leadership side of things. You know, a leader is someone who knows where they're going. So there's always a directional component to leadership. But here's the other side of it. I could be a leader who knows where I want to go, but I also need to have the ability to motivate and to persuade and to influence other human beings to go along with me. So there is that directional side of leadership, a leader knowing where the leader wants to go. But then there is that relational, there is that emotional, there's that motivational side of leadership, where we want people following us from their hearts, not because they have to follow us, but because they want to follow us.
And that's what I see with this leader down the shore.
Sounds like she's a great example of that.
She's an excellent example of that. You were talking about servant leadership. Isn't that part of what you refer in the book as the catalytic leadership?
Yes, the catalytic leadership model is a leadership model that I've created. I've been thinking about leadership for the last 40 years of my life. So there are three overlapping, interrelated things that we emphasize about leadership. So here's how we break it down. There has to be a relational component to leadership. That's where servant leadership comes in. So if you're going to inspire and motivate people, which is what leadership's all about, you've got to create a relational environment. But there's a second thing that we emphasize in the catalytic leadership model, because leaders need to be a catalyst of change in the lives of other people. And what we emphasize is what we call transformational leadership. The best leaders in the world are those leaders who themselves are in the process of change and transformation. When we are growing ourselves, when we are becoming the change that we want to see in the lives of our people, it's then that we become the catalyst of change that cause people to want to follow us. And then the third component to the catalytic leadership model is what we call situational leadership. That's when you're trying to create a synergistic environment. A servant leader creates a relational environment. A transformational leader creates a learning environment where people come to work to grow, not simply to work. But a situational leader believes there is no one best leadership style. So I need to become a student of my people, and I'm constantly assessing the level of competency and the level of commitment, the level of skill, and the level of will that somebody has to complete a task. And when I am making the right assessment of my people, because I become a student of my people, then I choose the correct leadership style. And what happens is synergy. The sum of our parts becomes greater than any individual part. And that's when people can achieve and accomplish things that they never dreamed was possible. Hopefully the people that are listening are Philadelphia Eagles fans, and I am a big one. And when I think about the success of the Eagles winning the Super Bowl last year, there was a chemistry that group of people had with each other. That team loved each other. It wasn't about any one individual. They were constantly placing their teammates and their needs before themselves. And we saw something really beautiful happening on a team level, because leaders and team members had the same vision, they shared the same value system, and they were deeply committed to each other relationally and loyal to each other. And that's where success comes from.
I find that that's generally the same on most championship teams.
Yes. You know, when you see the interviews in the locker room, whether it's the World Series, the Super Bowl, the Stanley Cup play, whatever, what are people talking about? They're always talking about the chemistry. We
Correct.
love each other in this locker room. We are committed to each other in this locker room. You see it time and time again. Sadly, in the world that we're living in, has never been more politically divided as it is today in our country.
Agreed.
And I believe that we are as racially divided as we have been for years. And what this country
Agreed.
needs is leaders who can unite us, leaders who can bring us together, and leaders who can help all of us understand that we all need to be a part of something that's bigger than ourselves. And we will only achieve great things when we walk together in unity.
And there have been a lack of candidates for this.
Yes, unfortunately, because the greatest crisis in our country, as I mentioned earlier, is the crisis of leadership. We
Yes.
desperately need moral, ethical, and character-based leaders. We are so disillusioned with our politicians that most people who have been given the privilege to vote, people have given their lives so that we have that privilege. It is a tragedy how many people do not vote, even in presidential elections, because we're disillusioned with our leaders.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
And it's scary, actually.
Well, when you come down to electing officials, it comes down to two factors, Republicans and Democrats. It's extremely expensive to run for political office. And if you need the financial support, you have to agree to one of the two parties, or you're left out
Sure.
of the competition. So it's either you go along with one of the two, or nothing.
There used to be a time, and I know, and I had this conversation with somebody yesterday, where people are talking about term limits now. Okay, and I was always against term limits, and the reason being, if you go back, and you go back even, 2 decades, the people that were there, even though that they had their platform that they were working on, if something in the country really had to get done, they reached the other side and compromised and got it done.
Oh, no, that word doesn't exist anymore.
And
compromise.
that does not happen anymore.
Well, the great problem today, and this is a leadership function, the great problem in our country and in our relationships is that we've lost the ability to listen to each other. We have become so polarized that we're either all the way to the left or all the way to the right, and we're not listening to understand each other so that we can come to a place where we can work together to solve and to resolve our problems. So, the bottom line is that it all goes back to this entire discussion. It goes back to leadership, because leaders are people that are change agents. Leaders are people who change the world.
Yes, I agree with that. And unfortunately, that whole left and right thing is affecting friendships.
Yes.
Okay. Because of our leaders, friends can't see through it to talk to people civilly on the other side.
Yes.
Which I think is disgraceful. I had a client for a number of years, and we used to talk politics. Okay. One of us was right, one of us was left. Okay. We totally disagreed, but we talked about it.
With some civility.
With a lot of civility.
Yes, and we've
Okay.
lost our civility
And
today.
and we've lost that.
Yes.
It becomes nastiness, name calling, and it's and that is coming from the leadership of this country,
Yes,
because that's what the leaders are doing. And I think
I agree.
the people in the country could learn a lot by maybe we should post this show on one of the news stations, and they would could learn a lot about leadership. And with that, on that note, we're at the end of our show. Mark, thank you very
Thanks
much.
so much
It was
for
a
the
great
privilege
show.
and the joy of being here.
I enjoyed
My
it
privilege.
immensely. Dennis, thank you.
Thank you.
And we will talk to you all in 2 weeks. Thank you for listening.